Good afternoon and welcome to the Apple, iPhone, iOS Voiceover Compatible Games interview series. Apple, iPhone, iOS Voiceover Compatible Games is a group that provides weekly long-form reviews of accessible iPhone games. In addition, we do interviews with game developers and accessibility influencers about the state of accessibility in games. Today, we have a great guest in James Center, a creator of multiple games on the iPhone. James, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for showing up. So James, I have ended up playing all of your games, and I didn't even realize they were all of your games, mostly because they're so varied and different from each other. I didn't expect it to all come out from the same developer. So, just to kind of kick it off, why don't you just start telling us, a little bit about yourself and, how you got into game development?
Yeah, so I am by day a graduate student at the University of Tennessee, but I've always been interested in game design. Even when I was a small child, I would take my family's big box of board games and rearrange the pieces. So I've always wanted to make games. And then I studied computer science, so that helped me to actually start making games.
And at Tennessee, is that what your focus is? Is it a graduate program in game design?
Well, I'm focusing on artificial intelligence.
Okay. And does that play a lot when you're kind of writing the code of, what the, your opponent does, your enemy does? Does that kind of play into that kind of design?
Yes, I actually did make a pretty sophisticated AI for A Few Minutes of Glory.
That's the most recent one that I played, was A Few Minutes of Glory, and I really like that game. I just like the whole structure of it. It kept me coming back, and it's also bite-sized, which kind of makes it nice, that you can, play around, then put it down, and then pick it up. So, I really enjoyed that game. That's the most recent one I played. So you're in Tennessee right now doing grad school. These multiple games that you've created, have this been a solo project that you've done by yourself, or have you had other people help you work on it?
It is all solo, all in my spare time.
Now, I'm completely blind, so I have experienced your games, completely from an auditory standpoint, using voiceover. What are the graphics like on those games? Have you? Are they simple? Are they complex? And how's that a little different from coding, having to do kind of the visual presentation as well?
So basically, my games have no graphics. You're not missing much. It's just a bunch of text and buttons on a blank screen. Sometimes I do a black background, sometimes I do a white background, but it's very, very simple. I try to keep it as simple as possible.
So, you started, as you said, kind of taking board games from your parents and redesigning those to create your own games, and then moved into computer programming. What was like the first game that you created? Was that as an electronic game? Was that as a teenager? Or is that when you got into college? What's the first kind of game that you kind of put out there?
I guess the first I would count is I would make text adventures inside Mist Online Uru Live, which, if you don't know, is kind of a MMO world exploration game, but it allows you to create text adventures inside the game. So that was my first experience. Then in college, I did an independent study in which I created Nano Empire. That was the first commercial game I made.
Okay. And was that, so you create this game at school, kind of taking that and getting it onto platforms for, the general public to play. Was that difficult to figure out, or did they make it pretty easy for you?
Basically, I just had to teach myself iOS development. I've made a few web games, but really iOS is my favorite platform for development. So.
And then when you're kind of creating it on the iOS development platform, is it easy to publish? Is it like you just hit a button, say my game's ready, and publish, or is it more complex than that?
Basically, you've just got to go make a page for the game on iTunes Connect. Yeah, Apple handles most of the heavy lifting for publishing.
And then how did you self-teach yourself? Is that, watching YouTube? Did you get a book? Like what's the process to self-teach yourself the iOS platform?
Let's see. I took a small class for it, but mostly I just read tutorials online.
That is that like, how long would you say it took you to get up to speed? Is that 30, 50, 100, 200 hours? How much time does it take to, really kind of figure out what you're doing to be able to move forward?
I would say a few days to get a very small prototype of a game going. Again, this is just a simple text-based game. I don't know how it would be for more complicated games, but then like it took me about a semester of independent study to have a fully functioning game.
And that's for Nano Empire.
Yes.
So, would you consider, like Nano Empire or Evelyn's Farm, would you consider those to be, like, would you categorize those as kind of text-based games? Because I think, they're more than that to me as I play them. I mean, you're kind of functionally dealing with text, but it's more than that, because there's, resources to manage. There's kind of other things going on at that. So like, how would you categorize those games if you were to, define what the genre is for those?
That's a good question. I think a lot of debate has been had over the definition of text-based games. They're not like classic text adventures,
right,
but I guess they're incremental games. That's a core part of the definition, but then I would call them text-based because they have no graphics and they're all about the text.
It seems to me it's almost like it's a combination of text-based, resource manager, idle adventure. There's kind of a lot of different things going on those particular games. Just this might be a good point because we're starting to kind of talk about some of those games. So you have Nano Empire, you have Evelyn's Farm, A Few Minutes of Glory, and Guess the Rule are the four games that I've played, and as far as I know, those are the four games you've put out, unless you tell me otherwise. Why don't we just tell people a little bit about each of those games?
Okay, so Nano Empire is an incremental adventure game where you are creating your own world in an age of nano robots and managing resources. A Few Minutes of Glory is a real-time strategy game. It's inspired by Age of Empires 2. It's medieval, but it's meant to be very fast, bite-sized matches, not a lot of actions per minute. So
what I particularly liked, I was nervous about that game when I started it because, for people who don't know, you kind of have 10 rounds that you're playing, and each round has a clock that's kind of ticking. As soon as you start, you have a certain amount of time to get all the things done. And I've played some other games like that, and when you're doing that with a voiceover and you have to keep swiping through stuff, you almost can't get everything done that you really should be able to get done. So you're kind of at a disadvantage when you're playing it with voiceover. But I found that game that it's compact enough and set up well enough that I didn't feel limited, that I wasn't getting to something that I needed to get done because I was limited by the functionality of voiceover. So I was really excited about that part of the game because, like I said, I was nervous that I wasn't going to really be able to fully experience that game. But the way you have it set up, how compact it is, really made me feel like I was fully participating in that game.
Great. So then my next game is Evelyn's Farm. This is a lot more, even more story driven than my past games. You play as a kid who's working to save money for college on a farm, and you quickly realize that spooky things are going on. And I really can't spoil it, but eventually it's going to turn into something entirely different. And it's got a lot of Stranger Things and Stephen King inspiration.
Yeah, I really like that game because, as you said, it was ended up being completely different than what I thought it was. I thought it was like like a farming simulator is what I thought I was about to be playing, and it goes in a completely different direction, and really took me off guard. And I just loved it. I wrote up all about that in my review of that game. It's really kind of special how it surprises you, which is fun in this day and age to be surprised.
Great. And then my last game is Guess the Rule. It's a very simple puzzle game. There's just a sequence of 3 shapes and a rule governing which 3 shapes are allowed. So maybe it's something like you have to have at least 1 red triangle. And your goal is to use your powers of logic to figure out what the rule is. So kind of a departure from my other games, but I just wanted to try it. So
in the order of making those games, so we know Nano Empire is first. So what in the sequence, what are the next games that you did? So Nano Empire, then what was the next game that you did?
A Few Minutes of Glory, then Evelyn's Farm, then Guess the Rule.
Okay. And do you have something that you're working on right now, or are you kind of maintaining these 4 games?
So I'm definitely thinking about the next game I want to make. And I've gone through like half a dozen ideas. And the one I'm currently leaning toward is a game about procedurally generated narrative, where every day you go to a new alternate reality where it could be absolutely anything. But it's still going to have kind of an incremental resource management structure, as in Nano Empire or Evelyn's Farm.
Is that similar to like an AI dungeon? I don't know if you've ever played that.
Yes, it's a little bit like AI Dungeon, but with less AI and more structure.
Is that going to require someone to type answers in or press buttons? Like you kind of have
it's more pressing buttons where you'll have a series of options.
I like that. Those games like AI Dungeon, it's fun, but it's very slow when you're blind or visually impaired, and you're using voiceover to type in the answers as opposed to being able to just use the keyboard. It's a lot slower process. It kind of for me it's a little too slow, just because I want to put my answer in, but it's taken me so long to just type in whatever answer I need to do or whatever action. So it kind of gets a little frustrating for that. So when you have a button you can click, that's a lot faster, and I like that. So glad that's the way you're going for this upcoming game. And so you're at kind of the beginning stages of that, thinking through that.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the targeted design phase. I've got the idea, now I've got to make it specific.
And from today to, hey, I'm going to post this out onto the Apple Store for everybody to consume, how long is the expectation that takes? Does that take you 6 months? Does it take you a year? Does it take you 3 years? How long does it take to produce one of your games?
Usually it takes me about 6 months to develop a game. It takes significantly longer than that to come up with the idea for a game. Mm-hmm. But yeah, several months if everything goes well.
Have your games, from kind of thought design to actual implementation, has it changed because well, what I wanted to do, I can't code quite the right way, or as you're coding you come up with a different ideas, so how much from your original idea to what's published, how much does it change over that development time?
So I really like to minimize the amount of time I spend coding because I don't have that much time. So I try to spend a lot of time imagining how the game will play, essentially playing it in my head, going through many different iterations of the design. And so that's kind of what I'm doing now. But then when I finally get to the prototyping stage, I should have a pretty good idea of what I want to make. And then I've just got to do minor refinements of that. At least that's my preferred design style. It doesn't always go that way in practice.
Yeah, so a lot of upfront preparation before you get to the actual coding of it.
Yeah.
Now, all 4 of those games, as I said, I've played all those games, I've reviewed all those games. They are all fully accessible. using the iPhone voiceover. Now, being text-based games, was a lot of the heavy lifting just by the nature of it being a text-based game? Was it already mostly accessible and you just had to do little tweaks, or did you have to, spend a lot of time and effort ensuring that the games were accessible? What was kind of that process to ensure that your games were accessible?
Yeah, so basically I just started making a text-based game, and then I was delighted to discover this wondrous technology of voiceover that automatically handles the accessibility. I didn't dream that anything like that was possible before I actually tried it. Then there are some minor tweaks, like in Guess the Rule, I've got to read out all of the shapes instead of just displaying them. Nano Empire, the original version, had you tapping a button as fast as you possibly could for like 30 seconds. And I figured out that didn't work so well in VoiceOver, so I made it turn-based. Little tweaks like that, but.
Did you make the whole game turn-based? Like, did you change that dynamic for the entire game, or for the people who are engaging VoiceOver, it's turn-based, but for the other people, it's click as fast as you can?
This is just the combat sequences where I changed it for VoiceOver.
Right, so just for VoiceOver. So VoiceOver, it's turn-based, but if you're not using VoiceOver, it's going to be that tap, 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 right?
Yes.
Right. And I mean, a lot of people, if you kind of don't have experience or know somebody who, might have a visual impairment, might not even be aware or think about accessibility. What kind of clued you in about the need to add accessibility to games?
So really, it all goes back to A Dark Room. Have you played
Great
that
game.
one?
Yeah, no, it's the very, very first game I reviewed, actually.
Cool. So that is the game that really inspired me to make Nano Empire, and showed me that a single developer could make a text-based game and have it be successful on the App Store. But then Amir was talking about accessibility in some of the developer logs. So I guess that was the first time I heard about it.
And have you, had any direct, feedback from blind and visually impaired players as well? Or were you able to kind of make it all accessible just by, thinking it through on your own?
I try to do it on my own, and then I do beta testing where I get a lot of feedback from the community.
As you, kind of construct this accessibility and add in this accessibility, you kind of, as you said, you probably saw an interview with Amir or read his development, notes about creating that game and adding the accessibility. A lot of games, only a small fraction have accessibility. Most games don't have accessibility features. What do you think is holding, other developers back from creating accessible games? Is it just a lack of awareness? Is it the time? Is it the finances it takes to add it to games? Is it the complexity? What is hindering, every game from offering some sort of accessibility, out to the community?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the style of game. Like, if you've got I'd say most games on the market are very action oriented and very graphically oriented. So that would be a lot more difficult to make accessible. Maybe there's some way to do it, but I can't imagine it right now. So I'd say one big issue is just the difficulty of making a text-based game in today's markets.
Difficulty in which way? And
just because the vast majority of people do not buy text-based games.
Right. So getting the sales to make it worthwhile to spend effort and time on that game.
Yeah. Although I do wonder, there are lots of adventure games that are less action oriented that would be ideal for some kind of accessibility. I guess it's still very hard to develop if you're not using VoiceOver. But yeah, I wish more people would do that.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, there's some genres that are definitely more difficult than others. If you were going to create a, Skyrim type of game or Fallout type of game that's very 3D graphic, you know, needed to play that game, that's going to be really difficult to play. I mean, Last of Us Part Two is, made efforts in doing that. It's obviously leaps and bounds of what the blind and visually impaired community has had before, but it's still got a long way to go to really make that a full experience. Text-based games, turn-based games, 2D audio games, 3D audio games that are yet contained, like a Blind Legend, where it's 3D, but you're still on a particular path. You can't fully roam anywhere and get yourself lost. I mean, those games really can be accessible and have been proven accessible by the very many games that are in those various genres that have become accessible. There's a game right now, you were talking about games that have more graphics and things like that. Have you become aware of a game called Swordy Quest?
I have heard of it. I've been
Yeah.
meaning to try it.
Yeah, so the developer of that, a guy named Charlie, he has really, I think, stretched the limits of accessibility really from the grassroots, to engaging the blind community about, how do I make my game accessible for you? How do I make this easier? How do I make this compelling? And he has created a very, very robust, RPG world with varied mechanics in it that is fully engageable and fully accessible for the blind community. And I think he's a really kind of a beacon of what is possible. And particularly, he's a one-man show. And so if, Charlie can do it, even bigger teams should be able to kind of figure it out and stretch it even farther than he has. So, I'm really excited when, a developer like yourself, a developer like Charlie, a developer like Amir, who have, really stretched the limits of accessibility, taken these, really fun and accessible games and proven that it is possible to make these games accessible. And, hopefully, you guys see the reward of the blind and visually impaired community purchasing those games. I know Charlie has told me like 80% of his sales are from people with visual impairments, who are engaging voiceover to play his game. So he's really kind of hit a nerve and really is a darling in the blind community. So I really appreciate the efforts that all of you developers are making, and that's part of what this interview series is about. Is I want to introduce the blind community to some great games, and I also want them to see the developers, real life people who are behind these games, who are putting forth effort to make them playable, for that particular community. And it's extra effort. It takes work to get that accessibility in. So I thank you for doing it.
Thank you for spreading the word.
Now, when you're creating all of these games, again, I'm a layman. I play games. I don't make games. What does it all take to create these games? I mean, there's obviously, there's design, there's structure, there's, sometimes music, sometimes there's graphics, there's audio design. There's just a whole lot that goes into it. What are the various components? If you kind of broke it down into sections of creating a game, and which ones are harder or easier than others to get through.
Let's see. So my design process, I guess it's simpler than most people's because I completely steer clear of sound effects and graphics, except for that one time when I drew some shapes. But it's all in, I only do iOS development, so it's all in Apple's Xcode editor. Basically, I have to come up with an object hierarchy for my game. So for example, in Nano Empire, you've got resources and locations and actions and a bunch of interactions between these various components. So I guess the hardest part of the design is kind of laying all of that out and then creating the appropriate code for those objects. Then I've got to make a user interface, which basically involves creating various scenes and dragging the text areas and the buttons onto the scene, and then writing the code for what happens when you click one of those items. And then the part that takes the longest is just writing the content. I have to create a system, and then I have to actually write the story and translate it into the format that the system can understand.
Then what about like the back end? So now you've created a game, you've published it. How do you get the word out that, look, I have Nano Empire or Evelyn's Farm or A Few Minutes of Glory. I have these games out there. How do you get people to become aware of your games?
So there are basically three main places where I've had success in marketing. One is audiogames.net. Like you were saying, I'd say I've had most of my success there. A lot of people really come to my games because they're accessible with VoiceOver.
Mm-hmm.
But then I also post my games on Reddit and on Touch Arcade. So
what about I think I originally became aware of your games from the AIIVCG database. Do you engage with that at all?
yes, I've done that one too. I mostly do the discussions on audio games, but then my games do get posted on AIIVCG as well.
And then do you do other, do you get out and, send your game to influencers or, what other ways do you do your marketing besides, Reddit and audio, is it audio? I keep wanting to say the Audio Vault, but that's the movie database. Tell me out here, the one that you just said.
Audio games.
Audio games, thank you. Besides Reddit and audio games, do you do any other aspects of marketing?
This is, I guess I try to do Twitter, but I've not been very successful on Twitter. And really, I just struggle with marketing. The market is so saturated for indie games.
Yes.
It's very difficult to get my games noticed, especially with no budget for advertising.
Right. Yeah, it's something like 1,000 games a day get posted out to the Apple Store, and to rise above that noise is nearly impossible. Particularly with some of those games having budgets to actually get themselves at the top of lists. But I can attest, as I said, I've played all of your games. I have enjoyed every single one of them. I think they're really high quality. Again, from a blind and visually impaired standpoint, super accessible, and really has been fun experiences, all of them. So hopefully this, the people who listen to this interview will give each of those games a try, because they're all worth your time to play.
Well, thank you so much.
Now, besides marketing, creating a game, marketing a game, you have to monetize these games in some way, which there's a couple different ways to do that. One-time purchases, there's in-game purchases. Like, how did you settle on whatever model you came up with, and determine what you thought this game should cost? How do you figure that out as an indie developer who's just trying to create their game and get it out there?
I've decided that I always want to do games where you pay up front and then play the game forever, just because I think that is the most straightforward way. I don't have to bend the gameplay in any way to bring in the ads or the in-app purchases. Just make a game that people enjoy, not worry about trying to make them pay beyond an initial payment.
So for me, that's my personal favorite way. I don't, want to think about, purchasing multiple times, at different spaces. Now, I will tell you, some background on the blind and visually impaired community. We are a group, by general rule, who likes to play it for free before we purchase, because there's so many times where you purchase a game and then find out it's not really accessible, and then you've wasted your money paying for a game that it's too difficult to play from an accessibility standpoint, or you get partway through and then there's a game breaking accessibility issue that now you can't continue. So we are a group that tends to be well, at least let me play it for a little while and then make me pay. Let me play for a level or two or whatever the case may be. Like I'm just thinking, we were mentioning Swordy Quest before. Swordy Quest has like 3 different maps. The first map you can play for free, but when you try to move on to the second map, then they say, okay, for the rest of the content you need to pay whatever the amount is. I forget how much they charge. So that's kind of a unique thing, with these different, groups who are going to be playing your game to kind of, figure out, how to charge as well, right? Because if you do one-time purchase up front, that might kind of scare off some of the blind and VI players who might say, well, I don't want to pay if I'm not 100% positive that it's playable. Now, you might get around that by being on audio games or being on AIIVCG and, having, notes that say, yes, this game is playable. People might go there, see that, and then know they can download it and pay for it, and it works. But not everybody checks those things, obviously. And what might help too is I don't know if I don't remember in your descriptions, but a lot of times in the description, on the App Store, people will say fully accessible with voiceover. That can help too with that, our particular community, knowing that we're not going to buy a game that we can't play. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I definitely will tell you a game is accessible on the App Store, and also rely on audio games. And I found it's really helpful to do a beta test beforehand, because that kind of builds up a reputation for the game. It lets people try it for free, and also gets me some crucial feedback before I finalize the game. So
and there's
anybody
also
wants to try my games for free, that is the way to do it.
Yeah, there's also if you're not aware, there's several different YouTubers who focus in on voiceover games, who are blind themselves or visually impaired themselves, and they do playthroughs of games that are accessible using voiceover. So, just a recommendation for you too. Maybe offer your game to them, let them make a YouTube video about it, because that's where a lot of blind people go to. They watch them, make sure that they can play it, and then if they can play it, then they they'll go out and purchase it.
Right.
So, you've made 4 great games, all accessible. What can the gamers, the blind and visually impaired gamers such as myself, what can we do to ensure that you will make more games that are accessible, and that other developers will make games that are accessible? What can we do as a community that will help support getting more accessible games?
Well, the most important thing that anybody can do to help me is to spread the word, because again, there are thousands of games made per day, and I want people to find my games. And one way you can do that is by leaving a review on the App Store. A rating helps, but an actual review helps even more in having my game picked up by the App Store's algorithms.
Right.
And then just spreading the word about my games on social media, that helps as well.
Yeah, I tell people to always go out and review those games, because again, when people may not realize the review, as James was just saying, is the more reviews you have, suddenly you show up on those. If you like this game, maybe you'll like Nano Empire, and his game starts showing up on those algorithms, which then gets more clicks, which then gets more sales, hopefully. So reviews are very, very important to game developers to get exposure for their games. So be sure to go out and review those games if you've played them and you like it. The best way that you can show James some love is to purchase the game and then go review that game. So James, what would you say is your hope for the future of gaming and accessibility? Where do you see ways that, on the other side, that's what we can do as players is to, increase the exposure of accessibility through reviews and purchases. What are developers doing, or what do you see as the next big thing that they can do to improve on accessibility?
I guess just bringing more genres of game into the fold of games that people make accessible. Especially, I could see a lot of point-and-click adventure games being highly likely to have some solution. And just continued innovation. Like, I don't know how The Last of Us was made accessible, but the fact that it shows a lot of potential for creative solutions. And I am excited about the possibilities. Also, I just
go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Hope there will be more small indie developers who let their imagination run wild and create the games of their dreams, even if it's not going to be that commercially successful. Just putting something out there is something the world needs. I hope that my games show you that anybody can make a game just on their own in their spare time.
Of those 4 games you made, which is your personal darling, which is the one that you have the most affinity for?
Definitely Evelyn's Farm is my favorite game. That was when the most involved narrative, and it took me 3 years to come up with that narrative. And I just love that game. It is my favorite of my games.
Going back to what you were just saying right before that, I think developers, Last of Us Part 2, the reason that is so robust of accessibility and 60 different features of accessibility is because they started at the beginning, at the onset, thinking about accessibility in their game. It wasn't a add-on at the end. They created a game and, well, now how do we make this accessible? They started at the beginning thinking about accessibility. So I think the more developers who can be aware of accessibility and keep it in mind right from the get-go, we'll probably have more accessible games come out in the future. So hopefully that's the trend that we're moving towards.
Yes.
So, again, I really appreciate your time, talking about, your game development history and, the various games that you have created. Like I said, they're all exceptional, really fun, and particularly with voiceover, really accessible to play. Do you have kind of any, closing thoughts or anything you want the community to know about accessibility, or about your games, or about future things that you're going to be working on that we should keep an eye out for?
Yeah, so keep an eye out for my alternate reality generation game that will be coming to audio games as soon as it's ready.
That'll be an iOS game as well?
Yes. Yeah, iOS is still the most commercially viable platform for me. Just, I guess a parting word would be to keep imagining worlds. This hobby allows us to create portals to infinite alternate realities, and I love it. And just thank you for being here for my games. Go forth and explore.
Great. And James, you're always welcome. If you're not already a member of the Facebook group, feel free to join the Facebook group. And whenever you have an update, feel free to share it and post it. I'm connected to you on Twitter. If I ever see you post anything about your games, I'll be sure to retweet so that the community can be aware of it as well. So, again, great games. I look forward to the one that you have coming up as well. And again, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to me about your games, and we look forward to what you come up with.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too.